So this is the biggest reason for people having problems when leaving properties to their kids. Guys, welcome to Brick by Brick Podcast, Real Estate Podcast. My name is George McPherson. I'm a real estate investor, I'm a real estate agent, and I'm a real estate coach. So, with that, guys, there's a lot of things that happen when people leave properties to their kids, right? And we always want to say, or we always want to do something to say, well, all right, you know what? We're leaving an inheritance for our children's children, right? But if we don't have a strategy behind it, then it could become a problem instead of a situation where you're leaving a legacy behind. So today we're going to talk about strategies, right? Because these are downfalls that people have when they're leaving properties or buying properties for their kids. And I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and he was talking about buying properties, or not properties, but buying land for his kids. Now, it's one thing. Buying land is completely different from buying an investment property, as far as a property that you can cash flow on, or a property that you could say, all right, I'm collecting some kind of rent from, even if it's not cash flowing. When you're buying land, the land doesn't give you anything. Land is mostly speculation. Land is saying, all right, you know what? I own something. You want to feel like you own something, so you buy land, right? Now, when you're buying land, you have to be strategic when you're buying land. If you're buying land and saying, you know what, I'm going to hold on to this and see what happened in the next 10, 15 years, where the property might worth something, then cool. That's speculation. But also, you have to remember those 10, 15 years, you have to pay taxes as well. If you live in a certain area, you have to make sure that you keep the property up, else they'll call code enforcement on you. So there's still costs to raw land, which you're not collecting on. Now, you can't be strategic, of course, and that's a different topic as far as making money off of land, right? Because there's ways that you could make money off of land. But we're just talking about tonight buying properties and not being strategic enough to sit down and talk to your kids or the people that's inheriting that property, let them know what's going on, right? So in a sense, where you buy a property, one of the main things that normally happens is they're already grieving, right? The person is already grieving. And for someone that might already inherit a property, you might understand what I'm talking about. But in a sense, you get a property, and that person is already grieving because they lost someone, right? Now, if you didn't leave any money behind, you just leave a property. Now it becomes something, instead of a asset, it becomes a liability if there's no strategy behind it. Meaning that now you left them with a burden as far as taxes. You left a burden as far as if that property is condemned or something like that, and it's not collecting cash flow, then now what do they do with that property, right? Most of the times they end up selling the property. Most of the times that's what happened, where investors will come in and purchase properties for pennies on the dollar, right? And I won't say even pennies on the dollar, but you're talking about 50% discount because there was no strategy behind it. So if there's a strategy behind why you're purchasing a property, so I'm talking even to the people today that's saying, hey, I want to leave a legacy behind for my kids. So I'm buying all these properties. I'm buying all these stuff, right? I'm buying all these rental properties, and I'm going to leave it to my kids. What if your kids don't want to do with that? What if they don't want to deal with it? Then what happens next? See, I've seen it time and time again where I'm looking at properties that are going into foreclosure. And the properties that are going into foreclosure was one recent one that I looked at. It actually went to the auction. The guy purchased the property. The dad died, right? The son inherited the property, but he ended up losing the property. He didn't even sell the property to try and make a profit on it. It actually went into foreclosure, right? So now they end up losing the property on a tax deed sale. Now, when it comes to a tax deed sale, they don't get nothing. A foreclosure, when you're talking about a bank, if you own money, so if you owe money on that property, say for instance, you owe the bank 90,000, and they sell it at the auction for 130,000. Well, the difference you still get back, right? The courts keep that money. Whatever is owed to the bank gets paid. Whatever is owed to the courts get paid. Whatever surplus after that, you get that money. Now, when you're talking about a tax deed sale, you don't get nothing. You end up losing that property because you don't know about the property that your parents left you, or you're leaving to your kids. You don't strategize and sit down and talk to them and say, hey, this is what's here. And then when time comes, that property going into a tax deed sale and you end up losing that property, right? So that's one part of it, right? And I'm just talking about a piece of land. Now, this could go for a house. This could go for anything as far as when you're talking about real estate. It could go for a house. It could go for a rental property. It could go for a multi-unit. It all depends, right? But when you are purchasing properties and you say, listen, you know what? I'm going to pass this down. I'm going to pass this down to my kids or whatnot. You have to make sure that they're financially stable enough to be able to do that. So it's either you're leaving money for them so they could do it, or you let them know, hey, these are properties that I have, and when I pass, these are going to be yours. You could sell them if you want. You could do whatever you want. One thing I hate the most, I'm from the islands, and listen, there's people that will be like, listen, I want that property to stay in the family. Now, what does that mean? That means that now you're burdening the next person. And I will never do this to my kids, but this happened um, a lot with island people where they'd be like, you know what? This has to stay in the family. Well, what are you leaving? What do you have set up? Do you have a trust set up with money that's funding the taxes, that's funding everything? Or now you're telling that person that, listen, you have a burden when I'm gone that you now have to pay for this property and keep it up because you can't sell it. So these are the things that you have to be strategic about when you're purchasing properties, especially when you're saying, all right, listen, you know what? I want to build wealth, but I also want to leave it for my kids. One of the next thing is like the legal things that comes with it, right? Because now you have to think about it. If they don't understand nothing about owning a property, right? They don't understand how to run when it comes to a rental property. You never taught them. You just buy the properties, you run it yourself, and you have them. You know, they just know that mommy and daddy have properties, rental properties, but they don't know how to run the business. Now, if anything, God forbid, you pass, right? And then they take over that property. When the person passed, they take over that property. What happens next? They don't know how to handle um, the legal stuff when it comes to tenants. They don't know when taxes are due. They don't know like any violations, if they have violations that could end up them losing the property. Again, code enforcement violations as far as not paying taxes. Those stuff are important. Ownership, as far as the documents, like you have to make sure that everything is known to that person, because a lot of times that's how people end up losing properties. That's a lot of times where you see probate happen, is because that person didn't do what was necessary to make sure that everything lines up. So if something, God forbid, something always happened to all of us, there's always going to be a backup plan where you strategize and say, all right, when I pass, this is what happens. My property don't have to go on probate, even if it's to set up a will, guys, right? A will don't take anything, but at the end of the day, a will still can be contested in court depending on where, right? But create a will, have it notarized, and at least have that if you don't have a trust, right? That way, God forbid something happens, right? It still can go to court, but you have something, right? So now when you're talking about the whole property situation, you're not leaving them in a burden to where they say, well, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do. So now they have to go to court. They have to do all this paperwork, and it might become frustrating for them to the point where they say, listen, you know what? I'm just going to get rid of the property. And a lot of times people will spend money, because I still have this in the back of my head as far as the recent property that I was looking at. and it was a great piece of property. It went for $39,000 at the auction. It went for $39,000 at the auction, right? So why did the owner of that property not inform his kids about that situation to where they end up losing that property? And he didn't only lose that property because I went deep into it. He had a property in California. That property also went into foreclosure after the dad passed, right? And you have to think about, there's certain things that wasn't set up in place, and because it wasn't set up in place, they end up losing the property that the dad lived in, and they end up losing the property in tax deed sale, and God knows how many other properties that one person have. And I'm just talking about one person here. So when you're purchasing properties and you're saying, listen, you know what, I'm leaving a legacy behind, you have to be strategic and sit down with your kids, and even have that conversation. I'm not even there yet with grandkids, but I talk to my kids all the time when it comes to real estate. Anything I do as far as business, my kids know a little bit about it. If you see, if you follow me on social media, they'll be at the house with me doing work. I'll walk them through and I'll tell them the process. I'll tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing. And surprisingly, my sons will even ask me questions and be like, how you learn that? Well, it's because I told him about it. So when you're purchasing properties, don't just purchase properties and say, listen, I'm leaving a legacy behind, so my kids is going to have something where my parents didn't leave anything for me. Well, leaving something for them is great, but if there's no strategy behind it, you just spend thousands of dollars on a property that now they can't afford, and now they have to, one, end up selling it, or they end up losing it because they're so sentimental. And this is one other thing that happens, because they'll be so sentimental with a property that they don't want to sell it. And they say, well, I'm not going to sell it. It's my mom's or it's my dad, and they cherish the house. And, it's been in the family for a long time. And because they haven't paid taxes on it, they end up losing the property, not knowing the legal stuff that goes behind the house. Right? So these are things that you have to sit down and talk about. And next thing is like having a plan. And that's what we're talking about right now, is just having that plan. Sit down. Every property that you purchase supposed to have some kind of exit strategy with it. I don't care what it is. If it's a flip, you already know the exit strategy. But if you're talking about a property that's a rental property, you're supposed to have an exit strategy, no matter if it's a rental or not. What if when you purchase that property and you're saying, well, you know what, you're purchasing it for a cash flow situation and it's not cash flowing? What do you do next? So you have to have some kind of exit strategy in place. So when you're talking about now, you're leaving that for someone to inherit, or when someone leave you a property and they didn't leave you any kind of like instructions or nothing, and you're new to this, is like the first thing you're going to think about is selling the property. If you're sentimental towards the property, then you're going to say, you know what, let me go ahead, and because I'm sentimental to the property, I'll hold on to it. And then you holding on to that property, you end up losing bigger. And the reason why you lose bigger is because you don't know the legal stuff that goes on, and then you don't pay taxes. You might not pay HOA. You might have not pay certain things, and now you have liens on those properties, and those liens end up hurting you, where they come back and take that property from you. So if you're thinking about purchasing a property, and I know everybody that's watching this, you should be thinking about purchasing some kind of property, leaving it behind, or just investing in real estate, period, right? If you own a home, what happens to that house? God forbid something happens to you, right? These are things that you have to sit down and talk to your spouse about. And then you have to talk about the person. If you have younger kids, then who's going to take care of the kids? And then the person that's taking care of the kids, what happens if we pass away? Sell the house. What goes towards the kids? What happened to the rental properties? What happened to properties that we own? You have to be strategic when it comes to you and real estate. So again, this is what people make mistakes about. One of the biggest things that I see people make when it comes to them buying properties so that their kids can inherit it. There's no strategy behind it. Create a strategy. There's no plan behind it. create a plan. If you don't, if you know that your kids, if you know that you're older and your kids are older and you see that your kids are struggling, maybe you want to say, hey, you know what? When if I pass, make sure that you sell this property. Because if they're struggling and you leave them a property, if they're struggling, they can't take care of the property. So by all means, at that point, they're gonna hold on to it. And guess what? They're gonna end up losing because they don't know that they can sell the property for a lot more. I see where people and hey, by all means, I buy property. And the reason why I'm saying this, I buy properties like this all the time, right? Where people end up in situations and they become motivated sellers, which is what I look for, right? But they become motivated sellers because they don't know what to do with a property. So if you don't want your kids or whoever you leave in a property to become motivated sellers because they don't know what to do with it, or if right now you're a motivated seller because you just inherit a property and you don't know what to do with it, then you could reach out to me as well. But what you want to do is you want to make sure, right, that there's some kind of plan, strategize. If somebody leave you a rental property or a property right now and you're thinking, what should you do with it? Then if you're not, for one, if you in the same area and you're renting, move in that house, right? That's a tip. Move in that house. If it's gonna cost you more, again, it's all depends. I always say this: it all depends on your financial situation. But now, if you move in that house, you're creating equity, and you're not paying off somebody else's property and giving them equity in that property, right? So that's one thing I'll say automatically. But there's different things when you're talking about real estate. There's different strategies, and people will always say, hey, you know what? This is the best thing to do in real estate. Well, that's your opinion. There's people right now that are killing it with rental properties, right? There's people that have subject to properties and that's all they do. There's people that do flips and that's all they do. There's people that do new construction, that all they do. There's people that do multifamily, that's all they do. There's people that do notes, that's all they do. There's people that do foreclosures, that's all they do. And I can keep going on and on. The thing is, when you're doing real estate, there's always should be a strategy behind what you're doing. And there should always be an exit strategy with any property that you purchase. So if you're purchasing a property, leaving it behind to inherit for someone to inherit, then leave a plan in place for them. Let them know the property exists. Some people don't even know the property exists until it's too late. So let them know what the property is. Let them know the value. Teach them, like my kids know the value of something. So because they know the value of a property, then they're not going to sell it for dumb cheap. They're not going to sell it for 50 cent, 50% of the value, right? If anything, they will know how to get money to put money in the property and bring it up to value and then sell it for a profit, sell it for more, or refinance it or do something else, because I teach them things when it comes to real estate. So if you're in real estate, don't just buy up real estate and you have kids and God forbid something happened to you and now you have all these properties and your kids don't know what to do with the properties. At least have that conversation where you sit down with them and say, listen, you know what? These are the properties that we have. God forbid anything happens to us. You could sell this. This property is actually cash flowing, right? So if you have rental properties, this property is cash flowing and this is what is cash flowing. The mortgage, the rent, we have such and such is a property management. They're the ones that's managing the property, right? So now instead of you leaving all the burden on them and now they're trying to figure out what's going on, they know what is already there. They know what exists and they know how to either keep that property or exit that property. So guys, make sure if you inherit a property, right? Take these simple advice before you go ahead and sell. You want to make sure that when you inherit that property, if it's a rental property, then know what the mortgage is, know what you're getting for rent, know all that stuff before you go ahead and just make a rational decision. If you inherit land, right? I'm going to say this. If you inherit land, do not keep the land if you don't know what to do with the land. Do not keep the land because you say my grandfather had the land and my grandmother had the land, or it's been passed down for generations, and you keep in the land. There has to be some kind of strategy behind it, right? What is the cause of it? Because land costs you money. Land is always going to cost you money. Land doesn't cash flow. Again, there's strategies to cash flow on the land, but most people that I've seen that inherit land or that have land has no strategy behind it. They're just buy it because, hey, you know what? I want ownership of something, and I want to say I own a piece of land. So I buy a land all the way in wherever, right? I don't even want to say what I was gonna say, but they bought the land wherever they feel like, because you know what, it's a piece of land and I have this land. I own this land. I can put whatever I want on it. All right, cool. But not even that you could put anything on it. There's restrictions depending on where you purchase the land. What is it zoned for? These are different things that you have to know when you're purchasing land. And I can go into a different podcast talking about land, what the zoning and what you could do when it comes to land. But guys, make sure that you have a strategy when you're purchasing land and you're leaving it for a legacy for your kids or for your grandkids. And if you're in a situation where you inherit a property, make sure that you know the things, what's the property worth, what you could sell it for, or what is your strategy now that you inherit that property. Are you capable, financially to keep that property, or is that property going to run you to the ground? And if it's going to run you to the ground, remember, they purchased that property with the intention of either leaving you cash flow or leaving you something that you can actually sell to get money so you can now start a business or do something like that, right? So guys, if you're ever looking for to purchase a property, um, reach out to me. If you're ever looking to sell a property, reach out to me. Again, thank you for watching Brick by Brick podcast. I'm always down looking for new opportunities. So if you know anybody that's selling a property or looking to purchase a property, also reach out to me. Let me know, because I always have investors. And if you're a private investor looking to get into real estate, but you don't know how, you don't have the time to get involved in real estate, but you have the money sitting aside and you just don't have the time to go out there and be flipping properties. I'm looking for partners, or I'm always have opportunities where I could partner up. So with that, guys, reach out to me on social media as well. So with that, guys, have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you on the next one.